Hey everyone, and welcome to my channel. Today I want to share with you my October wrap-up. If you have watched my October vlog, you know that I had COVID just last week, so my voice is still a little bit weird and I hope you can get through this. I will try to cut out any weird coughing, but just so you know what's going on with this. But today we're going to talk about the books that I have read in October. But before we go into the individual book reviews, I would like to give you some stats that have to do with my goal of reaching a 0 TBR next year. So I started out the year with 47 books on my TBR, and we started out October with 37 books on my physical TBR. And now let's see how I did in October with reducing that number. First of all, I read 12 books in October, which is very good for me. I did read 12 books in April as well, and that was my most successful month in numbers so far this year. So October was definitely a good one. Then I also acquired a couple of books. I bought 5 books in October, and those were audiobooks that I listened right away. And then I also borrowed 3 books from the library in October, and I also read those right away. Last but not least, 2 of the books I have read in October were rereads, so they do not reduce my physical TBR. So if we take this all together, 12 books read, 5 books bought, 3 books borrowed, and 2 rereads, I reduced my TBR by only 2 books, which isn't that great to be honest, but it is still something, and we're gonna count it just as that. So the 2 books I did get off the TBR were also quite chunky, so that's nice as well. So let's not dwell on this kind of lousy number, but talk about the actual books that I've read. The first book I read in October was my audiobook, and it was The Blonde Dies First by Joelle Wellington. This is a YA slasher horror book where we follow a group of teenagers who get invited to this party by some fancy white kids, and they're all like mixed in the group, and they do a Ouija board situation, and after that there is a monster hunting our group of friends. And this was really fun. I really enjoyed reading this book. I think I liked the first book by this author that I've read in April a little bit more, but just because the themes and the whole setup of the story worked a little bit better for me. But if you're looking for a fun YA horror book to read, I think that this one definitely delivers, and I will check out whatever Joelle Wellington writes next. Then the next book I finished is a TBR wet, so this has been on my TBR for very many years, and that is The Next Step in the Dance by Gautreaux. This is a book in which we follow a married couple. At the beginning of the book they're having problems, and the woman decides to break it off and kind of leave, and throughout the rest of this book, which is quite chunky, we see them struggle to kind of find their way back together. And this was definitely an interesting read. This is set around the 80s and 90s in the US, in the Bayou area, and I just really enjoyed the look that we get at these people here and how we analyze their relationship and their goals in life. Now, this has a lot of plot points that I do not enjoy. So we have married couples, which I don't always care about. We do have an unwanted pregnancy in this one, which I really don't like reading about. But apart from that, this book just hit all the marks for me. The writing is gorgeous. I loved the plot. It was so intriguing. From what I just explained, you would not expect how wild this book gets. So in the end, I had such a great time with this book, and I gave it 4.5 stars. Then next, I did a little rereading project with Monstress. I reread volume 6 and volume 7, and then I did read volume 8 for the first time. So right now I'm caught up with it, but the next volume is gonna come out in a couple of weeks. The Monstress comics follow a woman called Micah Halfwolf, and she has kind of like this old god living inside of her, and this is a very complex fantasy series in kind of like comic form, and we follow a world that is divided into humans and organics, and the organics are kind of human-animal hybrids. Micah and her friends are organics, and there is this like evil witch coven who are using organics to fuel their powers, and there's just a lot going on in this world. You have all of these like old gods where you don't really know who they are and why they're there. So yeah, this is like really detailed, and at the beginning can be a little bit confusing, but volume 6 is my favorite one. I gave this one 5 stars on reread, and then 7 and 8 were great too, and I gave those 4 stars, I believe. And I just highly recommend this series because it is so good and the art is also so stunning. Then next I finished another audiobook, and that was Dead 11 by Juliano. I did a little project where I read 3 kind of similar books that had very similar covers that are kind of like 90s VHS inspired. So if you want to go and check out that vlog, I will link it. But in short, Dead 11 is about a man who is looking for his missing sister, and he goes to this very remote island that pretty much no one has ever heard about. He can't really find any information before going there, so it is kind of like confusing why this island is such a mystery. And when he arrives there, the people are very strange and they seem kind of stuck in time. They seem stuck in the 90s, and so he's looking for the sister. We also get chapters from the sister's point of view with her time on this island, and we slowly figure out what's going on. I really enjoyed this book. It didn't quite go where I wanted it to go, but I gave it 4 stars. Then next I finished up the chunker of the month, and that was Discord of Gods by Jen Lyons. This is the final book in the Chorus of Dragons series. I do have reading vlogs for this whole series that I will link down below if you want to hear all of my thoughts, and also some spoilery thoughts that are marked. You can watch them whether you've read the books or not, but this final book was just everything I wanted it to be. This is the perfect conclusion in my eyes, and so I gave this one 5 stars. In this series we're following a boy and then young man called Kyrin as he discovers kind of who he really is. He grew up as an orphan in a brothel, but there is so much more to his story, and there's a 5-book series. These books don't look that big, but the font is tiny, so there is a lot packed into this series, and I just highly recommend it. I had such a good time reading these. Again, the first book with this series is a little bit confusing, but I would suggest if you enjoy the overall idea of it to push through, and it gets way more easy to understand what's going on in the later books, because we do have a lot of like soul fuckery with this one, and it's really good. Then I finished the next audiobook for my little VHS project, and that is Home is Where the Bodies Are by Jeneva Rose. This is a thriller, and in this one we have a family with 3 children, 2 daughters and a son, and the mother passes away from cancer, so they all have to come together at their childhood home, and while they go through the things of the mother to clear some of it out, they find a videotape where in the beginning it is one of their like childhood memories. Their mom used to film a lot of things to remember the family by, but then at the end of the tape there is something that is very mysterious and hints to their parents being involved in a missing persons case that is decades old. And so we have this setup of what happened, what was the involvement of the parents, and these 3 children try to figure that out. I want to give a big content warning in this one also for drug use and drug addiction, because one of the siblings is addicted to drugs and we do get her point of view, so this is also mentioned in a kind of visceral way, I would say. So I really enjoyed this book as well. Actually, this was my favorite one of that little reading project that I did. I gave this one 4 stars as well, and I think one thing I really liked about it is that the ending is so satisfying because you can guess along the whole time and you can get it right, which I did, and it felt very gratifying. And then next I finished the last book for this little project, and that was Horror Movie by Paul Tremblay. Unfortunately, this one was my least favorite of the bunch. I gave this one 3 stars. It just didn't really hit the mark for me. In this one, we follow a man who was involved in the creation of a famous horror movie that was never published. So there is this like cult following of this movie called Horror Movie, but it never actually appeared anywhere. Like, you can't watch it online or anything like that. There is like very few scenes you can watch online and a couple of stills from the filming of the movie, but it is like this cult thing, and so now people are interested in making a remake basically and actually bring the movie to people. And this one, as I said, it had a lot of like cruelty, but kind of like torture without you knowing why it's happening. And it feels kind of artsy and like very pretentious in the way it deals with like the horror movie genre. And maybe I'm not a connoisseur, but it really just didn't give me anything. So I think the audiobook experience definitely elevated it, because it does have some kind of like effects, like special effects in the sounds. Sometimes they're screaming or creepy music and stuff like that. And so I think the audio production actually bumped it up to 3 stars for me. Then next I finished an ebook I had been reading, and that is The London Séance Society by Sarah Penner. I had read The Lost Apothecary by Sarah Penner before, and I really enjoyed that one, so I wanted to check out her second book. I think it is her second novel. And so I read The London Séance Society, and unfortunately this one was also a flop for me. I gave this one 3 stars as well. I don't think that it is like bad, but I also don't think it's particularly good. It's like right in the middle there. In this one we follow a young girl who is trying to become a medium and to find out what happened to her murdered sister. So one morning her sister was found murdered. Her sister was very into the occult and she wanted to be a medium herself, and our main character has always been a skeptic. She doesn't really believe in it, but when she can't find out what happened to her sister, she kind of resorts to this to learn how to be a medium, to finally get closure. And so she travels to Paris from London to learn from this like very, very famous medium, and together they will uncover what is going on in London with the seances. But yeah, this one had a second POV where we read from a man's point of view, and that I would have scratched completely. Like, if I would have been the editor of this book, I would have said like, take all of that out. It was so unnecessary. We had so many moments where we would see a scene from a main character's point of view, and then we just get this scene again from the other person's point of view, and it just didn't add anything. If anything, it took away some of the intrigue because we already knew some things. And I think, again, it was very easy to guess what is going on. There was a tiny little twist at the end that I didn't see coming, but like, this was not one where it was fun to get along. It was one where I was like, it is so painfully obvious what's going on and the main character doesn't see it. Like, she was, for someone who's like all about like reason and being rational and finding conclusions, she's very into the natural sciences. She was so clueless throughout all of this book. Then I finished another ebook from my library, and that was Evocation by S T Gibson. This one also deals with seances, but this was a little bit more successful for me personally. I gave this one 4 stars and I really enjoyed it and would recommend it. This was also my first S T Gibson book, so I don't know how it compares to her other work, but in this one we follow 3 main characters, and one is a little bit more main character than the other 2, and that is David. David is the like son of this very famous occult family, and he has like very great powers when it comes to like summoning ghosts and being a medium and stuff. But one day he experiences something very, very weird, and from that day on he starts to feel worse and worse and worse, and he thinks it is his family curse that is finally come to collect on him basically. And so he decides to turn to his former lover and his wife to get them to help him. And this is kind of a poly story. David, the main character, is gay, his former lover is bi, and his wife is just his wife basically. But she's amazing. I think she was my favorite character. Moira is one of those like very open and loving and caring characters, but the way that she sets her boundaries in this book was great to see, and I just really enjoyed seeing her really figuring things out for herself and then communicating it so clearly, while the two boys were basically just stumbling around with everything. Relatable, I guess. But yeah, I had a fun time with this. I think that the plot was also kind of fun, so I would recommend if you're into that. This would maybe be a good time to mention that this series is also kind of a poly situation, kind of romance series. And then last but not least, on the last day of October, I finished my last audiobook, These Fleeting Shadows by Kate Alice Marshall. I have read Rules for Vanishing and Our Last Echoes by Kate Alice Marshall before. I absolutely loved those books. So this one had a little bit of a harder time, and unfortunately I did not love it quite as much. I still gave this one 4 stars. I feel like the ending kind of saved it a little bit for me, but there were some moments where I just wasn't really that engaged. In this book, we follow a young girl who goes back to her family's estate for the first time in many, many years because her grandpa died. So her mom, her stepfather, and herself are going back to this house, and in a weird circumstance, she actually inherits the house, but she has to stay there for 1 year without leaving to get the inheritance. And if she doesn't do it, no one will get anything. So she's really pressured to do this. And she decides to stay, even though she doesn't really know her family that well. She doesn't really know why her mom picked her up one day and left. She doesn't have any childhood memories. And then on the grounds of this estate, she also meets this mysterious girl who turns out to be the Harrow Witch. The estate is called Harrow. And they have some chemistry, let's just say that. So this is a sapphic story. But basically, it is about our main character trying to figure out what's going on with this estate. She has to find the center of the spiral, whatever that means. And yeah, this was an interesting book. This also has this like cosmic horror thing going on that so far all of Kate Alice Marshall's books had going on, but this was very tame compared with the first two. So I guess if you are easily scared, this might be a better book to read. But this had an interesting perspective on the whole question of like who is the monster. So as I said, the ending kind of saved it for me because it had more meaning in it than you would think while you're reading it. And this is also inspired by a different like story that the author talks about at the end, which was very interesting as well because I had never heard about that story before. And that's it. That is all the books I have read in October. I would love to hear about your October reading. What was your favorite book that you've read? I would love to hear about it in the comments. Leave a like and subscribe if you enjoyed watching, and I will talk to you very soon. Bye!